Okay, so imagine this. You have a parent, let's say your mom, and you've been worried about her memory for a while. Nothing major, but you're just starting to notice little things, like you call her and her voicemail box is full. Or when you ask her what she did that day, she has kind of some vague recollection, but it's missing some details. When you go over there, you see things placed in weird places. Maybe there's mail piling up. You notice that she forgets her train of thought or why she walked into a room. But to her, everything's fine. She's like, oh, I'm just getting old. I don't need to worry about the date. You don't need to worry about me. Your mom is a very hyper independent woman. She's always been that way. So anytime you get in there and you're a little bit concerned, she gets defensive. She's like, just leave me alone. Do your thing. I'll do mine. Don't worry about me. I'm not going crazy. But the thing is, your grandmother, her mom, had Alzheimer's disease. So you're worried, but you don't know if you're blowing it out of proportion or if you are reasonably worried because of this family history. And maybe you are actually onto something. It's very confusing to know exactly where things stand, and you would love to get her checked out. So eventually you get your mom to the doctor. She agrees, fine, I'll go to my doctor. I'll get a checkup. You can come with me, whatever you say, if this gets you off my back. So you go with her to the doctor, and the doctor says, okay, well, I understand you're concerned about memory. And she says, no, I'm not concerned. It's at them. They're concerned, pointing to you. And so you tell the doctor some of your concerns, things that you mentioned related to little flubs here and there, some memory loss, etc. The doctor says, okay, well, we can actually do a quick little assessment. It's called the MOCA, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. It's very brief. I'll just run you through some exercises, and that will give us an idea of where you stand. And your mom begrudgingly says, fine, let's do it. And she does the first thing, fine. It's like a trail where she needs to connect some dots together. The second one, they're like, okay, I want you to copy this picture here. And it's a picture of a cube. And she starts, and then she goes, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. This is dumb. I've never been good at math. What is this showing anyway? I'm fine. I'm old. It's fine. And so she quits, and you can't get an accurate picture there. Instead of pushing on it, the doctor says, okay, that's fine. Let's put this away. I just want to talk with you for a little bit. Do you mind if we just chat? And your mom says, that's fine. And the doctor says, do you mind if I just record a minute or two of us talking on this tablet? It can really help me figure out some things. And your mom says, whatever. Okay. So the doctor says, okay, push record. And they just chat about, what they did the other day, current things related to a sports team your mom follows, questions about your mom's childhood and what she did for work and things like that. And in a minute or two, she says, okay, that's fine. All done. Thank you for coming in and seeing me. And then the doctor lets you know you're going to have some notices in your medical record that tell us the results of this. And so you go home the next day, medical record gives you a little ding, and it says, hey, your mom has a 95% chance of having mild cognitive impairment. You should see a neurologist for further follow-up. That scenario is not too far away in the future. My name is Dr. Robert Duff. I'm a neuropsychologist, and I wanted to talk to you about an emerging technology that's really, really exciting, where people are using AI models to listen to somebody's speech and detect whether they have cognitive impairment, like dementia or even mild cognitive impairment. And the thing is, the accuracy rates are from 80 to 95% in research right now, which is crazy. And for just a minute or two of talking, they can get the same information that they would from a more extensive screener like the MOCA or the mini mental state exam. So let me tell you all about it. So with dementia, especially of the Alzheimer's type, there's many different types of dementia, but for Alzheimer's, one of the things that is involved is not just memory, but language. And you can see some subtle changes. If you've ever lived with somebody who's developed Alzheimer's, you know that they can maybe start to use more vague language. They say, hey, can you grab me my thing instead of can you grab me my phone? Or they'll lose their train of thought while they're talking. They might repeat themselves a lot more. There are little subtle signs that as humans, we can go, that sounds off. Right? And so because of that, we have started to develop tools that can analyze language. They can kind of be thought of as digital biomarkers, right? So you could go to the doctor and get some blood or plasma taken, and that can tell you, okay, do you have a high chance of having a lot of amyloid in your brain, which is related to Alzheimer's? Or with this, you could have a brief 1 to 2 minute voice sampling, and then from that, it can tell you predictively whether you're likely to have cognitive impairment. So pretty amazing stuff. Now, to be clear, we have been analyzing speech and language through computerized programs for decades, since before I was born. It's a very important part of research, but so far what we've done is we've manually selected speech patterns, right? So for instance, computing the number of pauses that somebody has, or the variability in their pitch or how much they say a certain word, right? We define those things through looking at the research, and then we pull them out and do kind of brute force statistics to gather some information about that. The difference now is that AI models can learn from the data themselves. You can get lots of samples of people talking that fall into different groups that you already know. So lots of samples of people who have Alzheimer's disease, lots of samples of people who are normally aging, lots of samples of people who have mild cognitive impairment. And then just feed that into the algorithm, and it will start to pick up on patterns that we would never think to look at. So as humans, we may have this intuition, but we don't really know where that intuition comes from. For the machine learning models, they're able to just look at all of that data, learn from it, and make a predictive model so it can also have that sense that something's not right here. Now, when it comes to how the actual tools currently work, most of the advanced models look at two different things, two different broad categories. So one is acoustic features, so the actual features of the voice that you notice in essentially the waveform. The other are linguistic features, so things related to if you were to see a transcript of the language, what it actually looks like. So some of the acoustic features are things like pitch, so how high or how low your voice sounds. Jitter and shimmer, these are two terms that mean little variations in pitch or volume. So if somebody has a wavering voice, think of RFK Jr., right? He has a very distinct voice. There's a lot of jitter in his voice, and that would be picked up on through something like this. Speech rate, that's simply words per minute, how quickly somebody is talking. And then pause duration and frequency, how often somebody is stopping, how frequently they're taking pauses, things like that. Now, linguistic features, right? The content of what you say. They're going to look at, are words repeated frequently? Is vague language used, like I talked about before? Are you pulling out not the exact word for something, but describing it or working your way around to, find something that could be a placeholder word for the thing you're trying to describe? Are sentences simpler than they should be? Does it have much complexity? And does the person drift off or lose their train of thought? So using these tools, the acoustic and the linguistic information, they can train machine learning models to identify patterns. And then that can allow them to separate people from, again, different groups, healthy, mild cognitive impairment, dementia level. So these different levels of severity. And again, the degree of accuracy is surprisingly high. There have been a few studies, and I can link these in the description, but they're all recent. So there's one out of the US in 2024, and they looked at short clips from memory testing sessions. And the important thing is that the models didn't have any prior information about the context of the speech. It simply had the sounds themselves and the voice samples, and it could identify mild cognitive impairment with about 87% accuracy. One of the most telling clues that they discovered was the use of and in language, which was really interesting. There was a study out of Japan this year in 2025. With this one, they had people chat with an interviewer for 1 minute. And just from that 1 minute chat, the AI model was able to identify those who had cognitive decline that was based on their score from an actual cognitive screener with 95% accuracy. And then one other one out of China, they had them respond to a classic storytelling task. It's a picture called the cookie theft picture. It's a lot of stuff happening. There's an overflowing sink. There's somebody cleaning a dish. There's kids stealing from the cookie jar. They're about to fall off the chair. Lots of stuff to kind of go into and describe. And it's a really good task to get people to elaborate. And the researchers found that the word usage was even more helpful than the vocal tone in that particular model, and it was able to accurately separate cognitively impaired speakers from healthy ones about 80% of the time. So we're seeing very, very high accuracy with these models. And this matters a lot because we want to be able to detect cognitive impairment as early as possible so that we can intervene. For some things like Alzheimer's disease, we still don't have a solution. We don't have a cure for it. But we can certainly do things related to planning ahead in terms of adjusting lifestyle and in terms of physical health and potentially even medication to slow things down or to change the course a little bit. And so identifying it early is really important. One of the situations that I see a lot is family members who have a loved one that they don't see in person very often. And over the phone, they might sound fine because they're keeping it general. They reassure their family member. They say, oh, I'm fine. Everything's good. And they don't really get to see that in the background. There's a decline happening over time, and this person is getting worse and worse. Like, what if this person could record a minute of the conversation, plug it into an app, and that app can say, hey, your mom probably is getting dementia. You should get her checked out. That way they can go fly out there or drive over there and say, okay, let's actually get a look at the situation and not just take mom's word for it. I also have a situation personally where I am often hired by adult protective services in my county to go out and evaluate people in the field. So if somebody is being taken advantage of, maybe they're falling prey to scams or family members are taking advantage of them, maybe they're not paying their bills and services are getting turned off, maybe their house is hoarded, various things like that, I'll come in and say, okay, does this person's situation represent a lack of capacity? Is this because they're declining cognitively? Do they have dementia? And is that causing them to be taken advantage of? And if so, how can we get them some help? Do they need to be potentially conserved by the county or a family member to help them be more safe? The thing is, identifying those people in the first place can be really hard because social workers from the county, they go out and they meet with the person and talk with them for a while. And they often try to have them do the MOCA, which is that cognitive screener I talked about at the beginning. And unsurprisingly, when somebody doesn't expect people from the county to be coming and getting into their business, and then they pull out a piece of paper and say, hey, can you do this test? They say, no, I don't need to do that. You leave, get out of here. If instead they could just ask for their consent to record a little bit while they're chatting, getting to know their situation, and then they can plug that into a model and it says, yes, this person needs Dr. Duff to evaluate them, that would be so exceptionally helpful. It would take a lot of the trouble with compliance and with variability between social workers being able to, really get somebody on their side and perform the assessment out of the equation, which would be really helpful for me. So I could see a lot of use cases where this is, exceptionally helpful. Now, there are also some limitations, right? So as amazing as these AI tools are and as promising as they are, there are some limitations. The research right now, and to be clear, this is where this stuff lives, in research. It's not available clinically yet. This is stuff that's being developed. And so as such, there is limited diversity. A lot of the studies that are out right now have a very homogeneous pool of people. Think like educated white people who speak English. It's different for different countries, but in general, they're all pretty homogeneous, which means that you can't extrapolate much. You can't apply it generally to the population of wherever you are. So while this may be something that applies very well to English or Mandarin, how well does it apply to somebody speaking, Indonesian or Tagalog or something like that? Certain languages may actually apply more or less to this type of technology. We'll have to see. And then real world speech is messy. A lot of these models are developed on structured tasks with good sound recording, people who are in a quiet environment. And that's not always how it works, right? In our lives, we talk in a less structured way. There's more chaos. There's usually more background noise, interruptions, emotional tones, and different forms of variability that could throw off potentially the recording. That could throw off potentially the tool that's used to analyze the speech. There's also a lot of nuance involved with language, right? If somebody just got braces and so their speech is more slurred, or they had a brain injury 10 years ago and they've recovered from it, but their speech is different than it was before, is that going to trigger as potentially cognitive impairment where that's not really the case? Or like we talked about RFK Jr. earlier, his voice is very wavering, and that's not, as far as we know, from cognitive impairment. That's from a different physical issue. Now, he has some interesting ideas, so I don't know about all of that. But the voice part of it, if that were to trigger the AI to say, hey, this person has cognitive impairment, that could potentially be a false positive. And we want to watch out for the possibility of those false positives and false negatives, especially if it's involved in any decision making. And then, lastly, privacy, ethical concerns. Your voice is private, and we know a lot of people right now have issues even with, your phone and Siri or Alexa or whatever the voice agent on your phone is, capturing your voice data. And so we want to make sure there are guardrails. If this ever does come into clinical practice, it needs to be HIPAA compliant. There needs to be, the ability to opt out. How is the data collected for broader research? A lot of stuff to be figured out in that regard. So, we're not there yet. There are limitations. But the bottom line is this is a very exciting development because you have something that is non-invasive, right? You don't have to poke or prod anybody. You don't have to have them do a very specific type of assessment or anything that's too emotionally upsetting. And that can give you a starting place. This is not going to replace the need for full assessment, but it may provide a very good avenue to getting people assessed and looked at more quickly, because getting to a neurologist, getting to a neuropsychologist like myself is better earlier than it is later down the line when there's an emergency situation or people really need to step step in and unfortunately take somebody's rights away or something like that. This can prevent us from having to get to that point by detecting much earlier in routine physicals or interactions with family. So I thought this was very interesting, but I'm a nerd. So let me know if you think it's interesting. And I want to let you know, this was actually an article that I published on my Substack. I didn't read through it verbatim here, but I say most of these things on the Substack. If you want to check that out, I'm posting all kinds of interesting stuff about the brain, about emotions, about new technologies, and a little bit about my personal stuff as well. That's at robertduff.substack.com. Check that out if you don't mind, and I'll see you for the next video or whatever I end up doing. Bye.